I want you to turn to the book of Job. Job. Now, I'll give you about 10 minutes to find the book of Job. Job. We got to move quickly, so I'm going to speak fast because school will be starting by the time I finish this message. The book of Job. And let's begin at chapter 1, and you got to really stick with me this morning. You're probably wondering why this is here. I was going to just do a couple of spins and a dismount to let you know that I am in great shape. All right, Job 1:1. The wonderful giver of Uz. In the land of Uz, there was a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless, upright. He feared God. He shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 5,000 oxen, 500 donkeys, and a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people in the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes, and on their birthdays they would invite their 3 sisters to eat, drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And this was Job's regular custom. So this story starts in the land of Uz. This comes from a genre that we call wisdom literature. And it gets a little difficult, but just keep in mind that it is written with this ideal of wisdom literature. The story starts in a place called Uz. Now here's the question. Where is Uz? We really don't know. Many scholars think it's just right outside Parsippany. No, that's not true. It's a place that we're not supposed to really know. It's supposed to be universal. Remember the beginning of Star Wars? It starts out with those letters, and it says, a long time ago in a faraway place. Well, that's Job, and that's Uz. It's a long time ago in a faraway place. It's not in Israel. It's not in Egypt. We don't know where it is. It's never mentioned again. And I think part of it is because the problems in this book are problems in the human race. This is everybody's story. Now, at the start of the story, and we got to go quick, everything is good. There's a guy named Job, as you know. He's a good guy. He's righteous. He's pious. And he's living the good life. And he's so cautious that he even offers sacrifice for his children. Remember? He's thinking maybe they sinned, and maybe God is a little bit sensitive, and so he is that righteous. And as a result, God gives him this wonderful, wonderful life. And this is what the writer wants us to get. This is key. The amount of blessing that Job experiences is directly proportional to the amount of obedience that he offers. There is this relationship between blessings and obedience. That's how things operate in Uz. But something happens. Trouble is coming. In verse 6, there's this radical shift The story of Job, by the way, is on two levels. There's this here, the lower stage, and then there's the upper stage. And now I want you to keep this in your mind as we go through the story. The lower stage below this is where Job lives. It's where you live. We live below this. There's also an upper stage. It's the other world. We don't see that world. That's where God is. That's spiritual reality. Now, that's very crucial to the story. We, those of us who are going to go through this story, we see what's happening on both sides. We never get to see, usually, what's going on up there. But through this story, we do. And the writer intends for this to happen. Job only knows this side, below. So let's look at that. Verse 6. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan comes with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered, "From roaming through the earth, going back and forth in it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He's blameless, upright. He shuns evil." And then Satan replied, "Does Job fear you for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household? Haven't you blessed the works of his hands so that his flocks and his herds are spread throughout the whole area?" Hey, listen, got something for you, God. Why don't you stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and surely he will curse you to your face. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Very well. Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger." Now, I know all kinds of stuff is going on. This sounds really, remember, this is a part of wisdom literature. This is a part of, we never see this kind of interaction in any other book. Job is unique. It's the oldest book in the Bible. So, Satan goes out. We're not going to read it, but just trust me, for the sake of time. Job loses his livestock. He loses his wealth. He loses his servants. He loses his children. He loses everything. That's the point the writer wants you to see. And we wonder, how is he going to respond? Verse 20. At this, Job got up. He tore his robes and he shaved his head. That's a part of just anguish. And then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will depart. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised." And in all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Job grieves, Job worships, and he speaks words of blessing and praise. And in all of this, the writer says, he did not sin. That's Job down here. Then in chapter 2, the story switches back up here. Chapter 2, verse 3. So the Lord said to Satan, again, poetically, you see it as it's written, "Have you," same words, "have you considered my servant Job? No one on earth is like him, blameless, upright, fears God, shuns evil." He still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. Satan says and replies, skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. So stretch out your hand and strike him physically, his bones, his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well, he's in your hands, but you must not take his life. Now, we need to talk for a minute. I know you got a lot of questions, and I'll answer those questions if you want to come up afterwards. One for a family. We need to talk for a moment about what's going on here in the upper stage, because it seems very strange when you read this at first. See, here's the deal. A lot of people think that the key question in Job is, where is God when we suffer? But that's not the fundamental question. The key question on the upper stage, the key question really for the whole book, is what Satan asked. Does Job fear God for nothing? You know, we could say it about you and me. Do we worship God for nothing? I mean, he can put us in hell. Which means this. He's saying, hey, God, Job is devoted to you. He worships you. But the only reason he does is because it's in his own self-interest. You scratch his back, he scratches your back. You know, God, you just don't understand humans. You think Job loves you? He doesn't love you. In his ideal of love, truth is, his love is, he loves you the way children love Santa Claus. He loves you the way children love the ice cream man. He loves you the way Imelda Marcos loves shoe salesmen. God, you just turn off your blessing and watch how fast he turns off his praise, his devotion. This is what is at the core of this book. That the whole idea of self-giving love is just a farce. The reality is, among humans, everybody is looking out for number one. It's a dog-eat-dog survival of the fittest. And the suffering that these these creatures have, it's just meaningless. It's meaningless. And this book says no. God says through this book, your view is cynical, it's warped, it's misguided, it's wrong. At the core of the universe, at the core of life, is self-giving, self-sacrificial, even suffering love. And therefore, hope makes sense. Because this self-sacrificing God is bigger than our suffering. And that's really what's at stake in the story. Look at chapter 2, verse 7. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and he afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. And Job took a piece of broken pottery, and he scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. Job gets hit with another wave. This time there's subtle differences in his response. This time he does not fall on the ground and worship. This time he does not say, "May the name of the Lord be praised." This time he goes and he sits on ashes. He's sitting on the town dump. It's an act of grieving. chapter 2, look at this, chapter 2, verse 9. His wife, Mrs. Job, says to him, "Hey, Job, curse God and die." Now, this could not have been really encouraging for Job, right? But we can't judge her too harshly. Remember, a lot of people, preachers, they go nuts on her for saying this. Mrs. Job has lost everything as well. She's lost all of her children. Now she has to give care to a horribly diseased husband until he dies. And when he dies, she's going to be left alone and destitute. And I really think she's giving voice to what her husband surely has thought. But he doesn't do it. But notice what he says to her, Job 2:10. "Shall we accept good from God and not evil, not trouble?" See, he's right now struggling to understand God. Is God the kind of person who sends trouble? Is God the kind of person who sends evil? Is God really good? He's struggling. Shall we accept good from God and not evil? And it's interesting. Remember, after the first wave hits in chapter 1, it says this in Job 1:22, "In all of this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God." Now there's this little qualifying word. Job did not sin in what he said. But in his mind, in his heart, he's struggling. Then in verse 11, still in this lower stage, we're told that his friends, he had some friends, and they hear about his trouble, and they come to visit Job. Look at them. It's the three guys there's Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, and Dadgum the Taramite. I made the last one up just to see if you were listening. All right, they all come to Job, and they meet together to sympathize with him, to give him comfort. By the way, this story is so it's so well put together. It's full of irony, right? Job, who was once famous for all of his wealth, is now famous for all of his problems, all of his suffering. And so these guys show up to sympathize with him. And the Hebrew verb that is used, that's translated sympathize, it's really an action verb meaning to rock, meaning to shake back and forth, right? You've seen this when a person is in trauma, or you've seen something that's happened in the Middle East, and you see a woman holding her baby, and she's just rocking back and forth. The mother is in a state of shock. It's just very visceral. But these three guys, their love is so great, and their grief is so intense for Job, that they plan to sit next to him and just sort of take on his anguish. Look at chapter 2, verse 12. When they saw Job from a distance, so they haven't even got there yet, they could hardly recognize him. And they began to weep aloud. They tore their robes, and they sprinkled dust on their heads. It's kind of strange, right? Usually when somebody's in bad shape, you get there, you try to cheer them up, right? Things will get better. You'll get back on your feet. Have you ever been or wondered about being so messed up that when your friends come and they take a look at you, the first thing they do is just burst into tears? That's not a good sign. That tells you how desperate Job's condition is. They're weeping. Then they sat on the ground, the text says, for 7 days. Look at chapter 2, verse 13. They sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. Never said a word to him. Never gave advice. I know you're a little bit like this. I'm like that. I don't like silence. I panic in an elevator because nobody talks. And when I'm looking at someone and they're sick, it would make me uncomfortable not to speak. I want to speak, right? I want to make it better. We just have that tendency. These guys never said a word. And it wasn't just for a minute or an hour or a whole afternoon or a whole day. 7 consecutive days and nights. Not a word. And this is such a powerful act that this became part of Jewish tradition that still goes on today. It's called sitting Shiva. Literally, it means sitting 7. Friends will come over and will mourn for a period of a week. You know what I was thinking? It's a great example of what Paul says to the church in Rome and as a result to us. Romans 12:15. Mourn with those who mourn. Do you know how important that is? Can I tell you what Paul did not say? Give really good advice to people who mourn. He did not say what many of us do, fix people who mourn. He didn't tell people who mourn to snap out of it and get with the program or give a website. Listen to the sermon 2 weeks ago. No, he says, just mourn with people who are hurting. Why? Because what they're doing is at the key of the book is self-sacrificial, self-giving love. And it's redemptive. It's at the core of what we need. Mourn with those who mourn. And when you do that, God is at work in ways we do not understand that go way deeper than words. I wish we could learn that. I wish we could learn as Christians to speak less and listen. And maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons why Job was able to persevere through this struggle was that he had a few friends who sat with him in silence, with no answers, no advice. They were just there. Do you have any friends that would do that for you? Anybody that you would do that for? This is why small groups are so important. It isn't an option for your growth. It is an option for the growth of this church. You'll build relationships that will help you weather the storm. Remember, the vision that we have is this: lives transformed through relationships. We need close relationships. You know why? Because in your life, a storm is coming. You will be visiting us. You will visit us. So they do that for 7 days, 7 nights, and Job's friends are just brilliant in their silence. Their silence was a gift. But they made this one big mistake. they speak. And what they said was dead wrong. Then finally, after those 7 days of silence, Job responds. And you wonder, can he say what he said in chapter 1? God gives, God takes away, the name of the Lord be praised. Then the test would be over, and this story would be very short. Job 3:1. So after this, Job opened his mouth, and he cursed the day of his birth. Look at Job 3:2. May the day of my birth perish, and the night which said, hey, a boy was conceived. May that day turn into darkness. May God not care about it. May no light shine on it. And then Job gets really creative in his anger. I like this. Job 3:8. May those, 3:8. May those who curse days curse this day. So obviously there was an occupation back in that time of day cursing, right? So he says, may those who curse day. It's like day trading, but it's just day cursing. May those who curse days curse this day. Those who are ready to rouse Leviathan, why did I not perish at birth and die as I came through the womb? Now, we're only in chapter 3. You want me to stop? No, you're saying right now. No, finish it. All right. Now, for the next 28 chapters, Job just pours out this level of bitterness and anger and confusion toward God. And it's staggering. It's amazing that it's even in the Bible. It's so staggering that his 3 friends who are pious toward God, they can't stand it, and they start to argue with Job. And each one of them expressed the same fundamental truth. They do it over and over and over again. It was basic in the literature of the day. It's called Mesopotamian wisdom literature. And here's what Mesopotamian wisdom literature says. It's not just in part of Israel. It's all over that country, all over that area. And that's this. Here it is. Whatever you're experiencing, it is what you have brought on yourself by the way you live. Basically, so if you're prospering, it's because you've done good stuff. You please God, and God is honoring you. And on the other hand, if you're suffering, it's because you've done bad stuff. You've angered the gods, whoever they might be. And this idea spread all through Israel and outside of Israel. It was all over the place. And by the way, it's still around today. And by the way, a lot of Christians still believe this. You get what you deserve. And Job can't stand it. And they keep doing it again and again and again. If any of you have ever read through the book of Job, you notice that it gets kind of boring in the middle. You want to say, okay, get on with it. I get it. I was visiting Jim Lutz. Is Jim here today? Okay, he said he would be here, but Jim just had surgery, so I went with him and I was sitting Shiva. Not 7 days, 7 minutes. And he asked me what I was going to preach on. So I'm going to preach on Job. And he says, you know what? He goes, I like the first 2 chapters of Job, and I like the last 2 chapters of Job. But I can't stand that whole big middle section. Well, you know, that really is that's the intention of the writer, right? He wants to hit us over the head that what expresses that conventional wisdom of its day. Job, you must have done something wrong, because if you hadn't, why are you experiencing all this suffering? And Job's response is really good. He doesn't claim to be perfect. He just says this, you guys know me. My life used to be great. Now my life really is terrible. But I'm still the same guy, what is going on. It's got to be something deeper. It's got to be something more complex. It's got to be something more mysterious. I used to be a good guy and that my life was so good. Now my life is terrible, and so I must have done terrible things. It's not that. And so that whole big middle section of the book is just an argument that goes over and over and over again because the writer wants us to understand that this is the problem. Job questions God, and he's trying to cling to God, and he accuses God. Job 23, look at this, verse 3. Job says this. This is cool. If only I knew where to find that guy. If only I knew where God lives. If only I could go to his dwelling place and I would state my case before him and I would fill my mouth with good arguments. In other words, he's saying, I wish I could take God to court. If only God would just show up, then I could talk to him man to man or man to God. And I'd give him an earful. And in chapter 38, Job gets his wish. The text says this, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Can you imagine what that was like? Just like I just heard, that was the Lord speak. Job, look at Job, Job 28. Now, this is going to sound tough, so just kind of listen to it. Job 38, verse 2. God speaking. Who is it that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Prepare to defend. That's my wife. Prepare to defend yourself. I will question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you must know. Who stretched the measuring line across it where the footing set or laid the cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Now, what you notice when you read this, when God shows up, he doesn't seem to get around to answering Job's question, why? Specifically, he does not tell Job of what happened in chapter 1 and 2 in the upper level. Doesn't say anything about that. He just asks Job a bunch of questions that Job can't answer. Now, why does God do this? It almost sounds like he's a cosmic bully, right? Kind of like, I'm big, Job, you're little, stop whining. And part of what God is pointing out to Job is that he has a finite mind and a limited point of view. And so do you, and so do I. There are some things that go on we just don't know. There's a scholar, his name is Gerald Wilson, and he points out that in these three questions, God is indicating something about the kind of person he is. And that's the hinge of the story. Just for a few minutes, follow the trajectory of God's questions toward the end of the book of Job. Job 38, verse 25. God says, Job, who cut a channel for the torrents of rain, a path for the thunderstorms, to water a land where no one lives, an uninhabited desert, to satisfy a desolate wasteland and make the grass grow? Now, here's what would jump out to people who heard this story. Israel depended on rainfall. It was a dry, thirsty land. They would never waste water. So why would God waste water on a place where nobody lives? Because there's something about God that is good, and something that sometimes has no reason at all. God is gratuitously good. He gives just because he loves to give, even when it's not strategic. We do things, and we do good things, because it's strategic, not God. God cares for animals. And then he goes into animals. This is kind of fun. He goes into animals who have no apparent reason to exist. They're not strategic animals. They're like cats. That just was a dig at that man from 2 weeks ago. I heard it. He cares for animals that are kind of, who needs them, right? Chapter 39, and I'm just going to paraphrase these things, but we're in chapter 39. He talks about the ostrich. And the ostrich is a goofy-looking animal. The writer says, she flaps her wings joyfully, and like she thinks she's going to go somewhere with her wings. She's not. She has a very limited IQ. She lays her eggs, but she can't remember where she laid them. That sounds like me if I laid eggs. And when she runs, see, so it's all this negative stuff about the ostrich. And then he says, but when she runs, Job 39, the ostrich laughs at horse and rider. God just endowed this goofy animal with speed. Chapter 40, verse 15, God says, I made the behemoth, probably the hippo, probably. It's useless to you, says God. Ancient world used to consider hippos like a chaotic monster. It says in verse 19, he ranks first among the works of God. They saw it as useless. God says it was first. Best thing I ever did. Job 40. God says, man, when I made the hippo, I had my A game on. God goes on to talk about how he delights, listen, in the wild ox who never plows, in the wild donkey who is never tamed, and the mountain goats who give birth in a secret place that no man will ever see. And the Leviathan, probably the crocodile. God made the Leviathan, the crocodile. No one will ever eat, but nothing on earth is his equal. So this whole section that we just kind of flew by is God creating, caring, giving, delighting in animals that aren't good for anything at all. Why would God do that? There's a woman named Ann Diller, and she writes, because the Creator loves pizzazz. That's great. He's the kind of person who revels in beauty at his least strategic creatures because he is gratuitously good, uncontrollably generous, irrationally loving. He just gives all over the place for no reason at all because his name is pizzazz. See, in all of this conversation, Job finds out who God is. Job understands that he's irrationally loving, gratuitously good, irremediably generous. Job never finds out what goes on the upper stage. Job never does find out about the conversation because Job's story is your story, yours and mine. And on the earth, we live in this lower stage. But Job does find out something better. He finds out who God is. And that's why Job makes this amazing statement. Look at Job 42:5. My ears have heard about you, but now I see you. And that's enough. Because God comes down from the upper stage to the lower stage so that Job can see who he is. And it's a little bit like preparation for the day that God would come down in the person of Jesus from the upper stage to the lower stage. God would come down to your ash heap. God would take on your suffering, my suffering, and our sin on the cross. And when God would say to everybody on the lower stage, anybody, whatever you're going through, you come to me and give me your suffering. I know, I see, and I redeem. And then there's this epilogue in chapter 42. Let's just read this. I'm almost done. I only have like 8 more pages. Look at this, 42 verse 12. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camel, 1,000 oxen, 1,000 donkeys. He had 7, this is important, he had 7 sons, 3 daughters. The first daughter he named Yemimah, the second Keziah, the third Karen Hapuk. That almost sounds like a real name, doesn't it? I mean, and there was Karen. Nowhere in all the land were there found women, listen, as beautiful as Job's daughters. And their father granted them an inheritance along with the brothers. Now, I always thought this is kind of an odd part because you can't really replace kids, right? But that's not the point. We're thinking of this and trying to read it. This is almost like a story that's trying to tell us that everything he lost, he got back. The first thing that we would notice is that the writer gives the names of Job's kids. But who are the names of? Not the boys, the girls. Nobody does that. The daughters got the names. In Hebrew genealogy, that's unheard of. Just read that little section on Matthew. In Hebrew genealogy, that's unheard of. Never happens. And not only does he mention the names, but they're weird names. Remember, in ancient literature, in Old Testament, and it's still true today to some extent, people gave names to their kids because of maybe a character virtue they have or a character virtue they would like for them to have. Even today, parents name their children names like this: faith, hope, grace, Dwight. No, I added it. But all 3 names of Job's daughters, listen, this is so important you get this. The names of Job's daughters are very shallow names. It's all about beauty. That's why it's said about, or pleasure. That's why it says that they were the most beautiful girls. It didn't say that the sons were handsome. They're the most beautiful girls. All of it's kind of extravagant. For example, Yemimah, the first daughter, was the Hebrew word for dove. It's a bird of shade, a color. It was considered particularly lovely. The second daughter is named Keziah, which is where we get the word cinnamon. It means cinnamon. It was a prized spice in those days. You ever walked into a Cinnabon store and smell? Now you know why there's a God. That's the name of the second daughter, Cinnabon. The third daughter is Karen Hapuk. I just love saying that, Karen. One of my best friends is named Karen. That's the strangest name of all. You know what that name means? Horn of eyeshadow, right? He names his kid after makeup. It's like me naming my daughter, well, this is my son Jordan, my daughter Maybelline, and her sister Estee Lauder. And not only does he give the names, but he gives them weird names, and then the third is that he gives them an inheritance. We wouldn't tend to notice that, but people in the ancient world, when they heard this story, they noticed it. In ancient world, this is a male-dominated world. A father with 7 sons would never dream of giving anything to his daughter because the father gave to the sons, because that's going to take care of him in his old age. When you give to your son, you're putting money in your 401k. When you give to your daughters, the father-in-law is going to get that money. So it just made sense. Don't ever give to the daughters, give to the sons. Why does the writer include this crazy, odd stuff? Because he wants us to know that Job now delights in the least strategic creature. Job is now being gratuitously good, uncontrollably generous, irrationally loving. And he's just giving for no reason at all. He saw God, and he's reflecting God. And the book says, Satan, you are dead wrong. Would you bow? Everybody here who's in this room will suffer. Many of you are suffering right now. Deep, deep hurt. I want to just tell you right up front, I don't know. When I was first in the pastorate at the ripe age of 25, I had a religious answer for every question. I don't know why you're suffering. I don't know why your marriage is where it is. I don't know why your children are where they are and how long it will last. But I know this. Your response will make all the difference, more than you could possibly imagine, more than you can ever dream. I'm just saying this. Don't let go. Don't let go. Keep on, keeping on. You have a God who loves you deeply. And that God sent from the upper stage to the lower stage his Son. We just sang a song earlier that said that God sent Jesus to bring heaven here. I hope you've trusted him. I hope you know him. It is Christ that gives reason and meaning, not answers all the time, but meaning for suffering. Jesus learned the things he learned, often through suffering. Father, we thank you for your love for us. Thank you for your grace. Speak to us. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.